this meeting, and it's being live streamed. We will have some others that will jump in along the way, but excuse our co-chairs who are traveling and unable to attend with us today. Let me just talk a little bit about where we are in the process, remind you of what we're trying to accomplish. We set up a 5-stage master planning process, as you recall. And the first stage was kind of identifying the constraints, the opportunities, gathering information, understanding what's happening in our region, looking at the input that we've received from literally thousands of people in our community. The next step was taking that information and developing 3 planning studies that really explored different ways that we might develop areas of focus. And you were able to look at those last time. It was one kind of looking at creating a self-contained, complete community at the site. Another looking at a broader area, kind of a 4 to 5 mile radius catchment area that would identify needs and gaps in that broader region that could be filled here. And the third took a much larger view, looking at this as an economic catalyst for the region and for the state. So the third stage that we're just heading into is to understand those studies, understand how they perform, their relative strengths and weaknesses, and start to identify the elements of those studies that we would like to carry forward into a preferred alternative. We'll then, in stage 4, take that preferred alternative and really work on making it function better. How can we make it perform as best as we can relative to the priorities that have been set out by the legislature and by the public? And then the 5th stage is to take the materials and actually develop the plans that will be put forward to the public. So I said at the beginning that we're in kind of a critical stage, and we are. We're in between stages 2 and 3, where we'll take the information that we've learned over the last couple of weeks and try to, with you and with our board and the other working groups, determine what pieces we want to carry forward into that locally preferred alternative. So today, what we're trying to accomplish is a couple of things. We're going to go through 2 exercises. The first is we will go over what we've learned through our evaluation process, through some modeling, various analytical tools that have been employed to see how those 3 planning studies or alternatives function relative to one another. Get your input on what elements make the most sense to you, what you think the priorities ought to be in terms of recommendations to our board. I will tell you that the board is going to be meeting the next couple of weeks, and then again on April 13th in its regularly scheduled meeting to make some decisions about the preferred alternative going forward. So again, first stage today on our agenda, we'll have SOM present materials from their evaluation of the planning studies you saw last time, get some input on those. The second piece of it will be going back to our key vision elements that the working groups put together. And you may recall from the last meeting that we identified not just those key vision elements, but principles associated with them, and then specific initiatives associated with each of those principles. So key ideas that ought to be incorporated in the plan. And we'll review a piece of that with you, especially the community piece that is focusing on connectivity with the surrounding areas and making sure that we're meeting the needs of the region. So we'll go through that in whatever detail you wish today. But Any questions on where we are in the bigger process before we jump in with the agenda? Okay. Well, again, many thanks for being here, and thanks to our planning team from SOM. They've been putting in a lot of effort on this process. And in fact, the materials that you're going to see today they just kind of finished up about midnight last night, and so you're going to be the first to see them. We've just seen them briefly this morning, and so cutting edge stuff. We look forward to having a discussion. Understand that these are initial concepts, and we're going to be seeking your advice and direction on how we might refine them and get them ready for our board review. So with that, I think I'll turn the time over to SOM, and Pete Kendall, I think you're leading the charge today.
Yeah, great, Alan. Thank you so much. And it's great to be with everybody again. As Alan mentioned, we have concluded stage 2 of the project, and I'd like to maybe just take 10 or so minutes to run through the 3 concepts that we've completed. We have advanced all 3 concepts further than what you saw last time, and then I'll walk you through the evaluation criteria, which is quite interesting. As Alan mentioned, there are 3 development concepts, each of which have a different economic outlook for the project. And just to refresh everyone's memory, number 1 has the highest proportion of residential GFA or project area. Number 3 has the highest percentage of commercial GFA, and number 2 is in the middle. So just keep that in mind as you walk through these concepts. As Alan mentioned, option 1 is really what we call a complete community, and it's really about how the project can most effectively accommodate and meet the needs of the immediately surrounding area. The project GFA, or gross floor area, is always about 15 million in all 3 concepts. Option 1, as you may recall, has these 7 districts that are arranged around a more linear open space. As I mentioned, it does have the highest proportion of residential, about 60% residential development. And we've also added some imagery around what we see as sort of some key elements of each concept. So this one really is sort of a district-based idea. And by district-based idea, we mean that each district is discrete and can be programmed in specific ways. They have cores that might be mixed use. So it's almost like 7 neighborhoods in this project. And those neighborhood centers can be used for a variety of things. They can be used for community events. They will also have retail in them. And we see the density as being concentrated in specific points around these central areas. The open space really is organized around linear parks in option 1. And these parks can be programmed in different ways. They can also function as open space, as stormwater management areas. The road system is well resolved and extensive, but it also allows car-free zones, which are shown here in the red areas. And we think these car-free zones are quite important to the walkability of the district and the project. As you recall, BRT will be coming through the project. We have 2 stations shown here in red circles, and then we're also looking at complementary secondary circulators, which are shown in yellow. We're considering shared parking resources in the project, and that's part of our financial evaluation. And then specific programming ideas around culture and entertainment at different points in the project. We also have determined that there could be the possibility of a school on the site. And the overall density of the project typically generates about a 3 to 4 story building, but in this diagram, you can see around the core areas of each district, we're hoping and planning that certain buildings can be higher than that. So in the 6 to 8 story range, perhaps even 1 or 2 buildings going up to 10 or even 12 stories. So that's option 1, or what we call concept 1. Concept 2 is the regional hub. Now this has a slightly larger catchment and influence area, about 5 miles. So we're starting to understand and think about how this project will impact the surrounding communities. So this one really is about adding a few regional or sub-regional elements. And those 2 elements that we've added to this scheme are a larger park and then also a larger retail and entertainment element. So that's the key characteristic of option 2. You can also see in the master plan this link through the project. We think this is a very important trail connection, this regional trail connection shown by the orange line that would link the river to the range. This option also introduces an institutional anchor, which you can see here in the dark blue, and also that larger sub-regional retail core that I mentioned. This also has an idea of cores and centers that are more extensive in the center of the project. So this has a higher proportion of commercial uses. And these types of spaces, again, can be community spaces. They can be used for different events. They would also be significantly retail focused or entertainment focused. Generally, we're thinking the retail might look something like this, kind of 2 stories, organized in a walkable and very pedestrian-friendly environment. Density would be focused in the center of the project around selected open spaces. And these open spaces can be a variety of sizes and scales. And I think in this option, as in many of the other concepts, the open spaces will have a variety of scales. The second element of this concept is this slightly larger sub-regional park, what's labeled a sports park here. So this would be a community-based park facility, about 50 acres in size. It would have sports fields and other multi-purpose fields. This concept also is very much oriented towards road connectivity to reduce traffic congestion, but also provide some car-free areas. And the BRT and circulator route is also integrated into this concept in a slightly different configuration with parking resources organized throughout the plan. And again, specialty programming that give the project a unique character. On this drawing, you can see the institutional, what we're calling an institutional anchor tenant. Now, we're not proposing that this be an actual university campus, but it might be multiple institutions or universities might have a presence here. It might be a single building. It might be simply a few floors in a office or research building. And that may look something like this, where it's generally a lower rise configuration. In terms of the organization of the density and massing, you can see here the BRT and the red dotted line would go right through the main northern business core. And then we would have another southern entertainment core along that park. So we're sort of in this concept really providing 2 different gathering places within the plan. And here you see the colored version of that idea. The third concept is what we call the economic catalyst. And as Alan mentioned, this is a regional idea where the point really becomes an innovation business district that is a focal point economically for the central Wasatch Front. So we're excited about this, and this one really is driven by economic development, growing the tax base, catalyzing innovation and business development, all of those core principles of the project. The program, again, is around 15 million square feet, so similar to the other concepts. This is a slightly more traditional development model. It has 60% of the land devoted to developable area, so it's our highest proportion of developable land. It also has the highest proportion of non-residential uses or commercial uses. So these are comprised of institution, retail, mixed use, hotel, and most importantly, office, which is shown here in blue. So this really puts economic development forward. And these institutional and office uses will be in the scale of this type of building. This is a biosciences building on another project, but it's the approximate height that we're talking about. So 3 to 4, maybe 5 stories in the core areas. Concept 3 has really a central core, and that's the key driver of the urban form. And this project core shown here would be comprised of a variety of elements: retail, entertainment functions, organized around a central park. We also think, because this is so economically focused, it could accommodate a slightly taller building, what we're calling the Hive, which could be a mixed-use building that is oriented towards education and different types of communal functions. Could also have leasable office space. And the density map reflects that idea of a strong center. The open space is more traditionally organized around smaller spaces, but connected with linear parks. And that central park could look something like this. It can be a community gathering space. It can be in a location for outdoor events. And you can see the scale of the development that would be around that central park. I think this is a representative image of that. And the parks and open spaces can be programmed again with different community functions, such as dog parks and playgrounds and other types of activities. We also think concept 3 lends itself importantly to green infrastructure, and green infrastructure is simply a strategy to minimize underground stormwater management requirements and conserve all the water that falls on the site in a way that it can be reused for irrigation. This concept has the largest car-free area actually around that central park. This would be a substantial pedestrian zone around this mixed-use core, which we're really excited about. And again, this can have a variety of different activities: small-scale retail, gathering places for not only residents, but employees. This option also lends itself to several different transit ideas. In this concept, we're proposing to create an autonomous shuttle that would move through the different districts, but always looping back and connecting with BRT. And then there is additional programming of each of the zones in the project. Concept 3 also has the largest institutional and anchor tenant designation. So it really puts institutional relationships and research components forward as part of that economic model. And finally, the overall massing idea or density idea really is focused again around this central core and Central Park, and the BRT route would run right through that area. So we're getting a strong link between a central dense core, Central Park, and transit. So that's those are the three schemes or concepts. And I think before we move to the next stage, be happy to take any questions or clarifications on these three concepts.
I have a quick question about the regional hub.
Yeah.
Has there been, in the workshops, I spent a good amount of time, and the people who were concerned about parks and environment, and there were some questions about the green space and if there was any plans to, obviously we've got the emergency declaration here for water uses, and people were kind of concerned about, having, they wanted the green space, they wanted the open space, but they were also concerned about water uses and wanted to see if there might be any plans to make sure water's retained, or if there's hardscaping elements that could be incorporated there to kind of reduce that need for water there.
Yeah, that's been an ongoing focus for us, is to reduce water use throughout the project. So to design not only open spaces, but also the roof surfaces and the other hard surfaces in the project to conserve the water that falls on the site, minimize irrigation. We're looking at gray water recycling in some cases to support the irrigation strategy. But I think most importantly, we would really try and minimize the irrigation requirements, use native plants as much as possible, use more of a naturalized open space approach that would lend itself maybe to jogging paths and walking paths. So these would not all be manicured, mowed, and irrigated lawns. In fact, we would really try and minimize that to just the areas that are designated for different uses. So it is definitely top of mind, I think, right now in terms of our sustainable strategies.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So Ellen, I'm going to switch over to a different document. So just give me a second.
Ellen, can I bring something up?
Of course.
Okay, so I like a lot of what I'm seeing here, Peter. I think there's some really exciting elements to it. I'm with Canyon School District again. I know we have a meeting later today that we're going to be talking about some additional considerations, but one of the things I just want to point out is the higher density housing we have, the more as a school system, we kind of have to provide more of a traditional model of schooling rather than something more innovative, because at that point, you're really trying to utilize how to be able to educate more kids and to be able to do that in a way that's fiscally appropriate. It becomes more difficult the more people you have in that concentrated space. And at that point, you're just having to go along with it more of a traditional model. I know that a lot of the conversations that we've had about what people want for the education there, especially with the innovation within universities and whatnot, they want something that's more innovative. So it's just something to consider, that the more high density housing we have, the more families we bring in, the more that the school districts are going to have to fall back on a model that's financially conservative rather than doing something that's more out in front and innovative, especially with the university presence there.
Great.
Thank you. Appreciate that
thanks.
comment in the background. It'll be good to talk about that and other aspects of the impacts on schools when we meet later today, and we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Part of our scope of work and part of the process that Alan described was to evaluate the 3 concepts based on a series of criteria. And just in terms of the methodology, we have prepared the 3 framework plans that you just saw. We assigned different planning parameters to them. And then we performed a series of analytical models on those parameters, which I'll walk you through right now. We established 25 evaluation categories grouped in 5 different subcategories, which are shown here in this column under key vision elements. So we have transportation, community, sustainability, open space, and economy. We felt that 25 criteria provided a broad enough analytical set to make some decisions. The other element of the methodology is that we wanted it to be as objective as possible. So every criteria that we put forward, the 25, were evaluated against, for the most part, something that was objective and verifiable rather than someone's opinion. So we do think there was a relatively high level of objectivity. We then rank them on the right-hand side with a simple scoring methodology. So we just, if one of the concepts performed the best, it got a 3. If it performed the worst, it got a 1. And if it was in the middle, it got a 2. So this was a rough, not a rough, it was a relatively simple scoring method, but we do think it revealed some really interesting aspects of the plans. So we wanted to walk you through those today. And I just want to highlight that many of the scoring, much of the scoring revealed that oftentimes the concepts were actually extremely close together in terms of how they performed. So the first one that we did was what we called daily external car trips. And this really is about how the schemes performed in terms of generating external trips. Why this is important is we have as one of our goals, and one of the public goals is to reduce traffic congestion off-site or on neighboring roads. So you can see here that option 1, or concept 1, the complete community, performed the best. It had the fewest external car trips by about 20,000 daily car trips. So you'll notice there's a small asterisk on each one that indicates which concept performed the best. We've also written down a key takeaway at the top of the page, which is the team's opinion about what the conclusion was, or what the takeaway was from this particular criteria. So in this, based on this criteria, that having the more balanced land uses that the complete community exhibited reduced external car trips. And that speaks to air quality as well as traffic. Criteria 2 was intersection density. Now this is sort of a planning specific idea or concept that talks about porosity of the plan, meaning how easily people can move through it. So intersection density is one of the key metrics of that. So in this, for this metric, concept 2 performed the best. Now I will also say that what we learned from this overall evaluation was that we can take the lessons learned from one concept and also apply them to another concept. So it doesn't mean that one concept is the only approach. It's really more about the lessons learned. Criteria T3 analyzed the internal trip capture. And what this means is simply how many trips are captured internally based on the program mix. And in this evaluation, concept 2 performed the highest. And we believe that that's because it has the larger regional retail hub that I mentioned earlier. So this had the highest proportion of retail and entertainment functions. So essentially what it means is people don't need to leave the site to go out for the evening. They have that service or that opportunity on site. So the takeaway is having a larger retail and entertainment component allows residents and workers to remain on site. T4 really looked at the car-free zones, and in this analytical option, we looked at the ability of the plan to deliver a contiguous car-free area, and in this criteria option or concept 3 perform the best. Again, we can take the lessons learned from this and apply it to the other concepts as well. Criteria T5 looked at access to the BRT stations, and in this criteria, concept 2 performed the best. And we believe the reason for that is by introducing the larger park, which is up in the upper left of concept 2, it concentrated the development closer to the BRT station. So that was why it performed slightly better than the other ones. And again, you'll notice that they're all pretty good. And the difference between the concepts is not that great. So again, we can use the outcomes to optimize any of the concepts. We then took the 5 transportation analytics, and we have generated some preliminary recommendations, which we can discuss today. So the first is that residential land use should remain as a portion of the project program. The idea of a mixed-use project is very important to reducing car trips. The second has to do with block size, and that's really more of a detailed technical criteria. The third is that adopting a regional retail mix from concept 2 is an appropriate strategy for meeting on-site demand for retail entertainment. Takeaway or recommendation number 3 is to minimize large open spaces near BRT. We know that, and this sounds extremely logical, but putting development around BRT is better than having parks around BRT. And number 5 is we can selectively eliminate some automobile roads to create meaningful car-free zones. So these are the takeaways from that transportation analytics. Any questions on this? Moving on to the second evaluation set, what we call the community. This is really looking at land uses and the placement and proportion of land uses and how they build community. So this looked at access to retail. So as I mentioned in the conceptual presentations, we have a retail strategy for each concept. And concept number 2 performed the best, and we believe it's because it has the most dispersed retail cores out of any of the options. So we think that's the key takeaway, is to have retail dispersed through the plan in a way that it meets daily needs. Criteria 2 looked at jobs housing balance. This is an important metric because it speaks to this idea of a complete community. Can I live here and work here? So option 1 or concept 1 had the highest proportion of jobs per household. So you can see here that we have 31,000 jobs, but we also have 7,200 households. Concepts 2 and 3 have a higher proportion of jobs, but they also have a relatively lower proportion of households. So the closer this number is to 1 or 1, the better the jobs per household ratio is. In this criteria, concept 1 performed the best. Criteria C3 simply looked at access to district centers. So this really speaks to how close am I to.
Peter, can I jump in for
Sure.
1 second?
Yeah. Yep.
That if you could go back to jobs to housing, I think you have to. I would say it a little differently, and
Okay.
that is if you're looking for economic growth, alternative 3 performs the best because there's the most jobs on the site.
Correct.
The average jobs per household in Salt Lake area, I'm not sure what it is. Generally, it runs about 1.6 jobs per household nationally. So all of these greatly exceed the natural job need for the residential base. So if you're trying to get a perfect balance between jobs and job demand, alternative 1 comes closer to that, although it still dramatically exceeds it. If you're looking for the maximum employment and job development, alternative 3 would be the most. So it depends on your perspective as to which is the better outcome.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Criteria C3 is talking about access to district centers, as I mentioned. And again, this really speaks to how the project creates this live-work environment, this vibrant innovation district. Can I meet my daily needs? Is it an environment that I want to live and work in? And so again, because of the more compact nature of concept 2, using less land for development, but still maintaining the same overall GFA, it does facilitate a slightly more compact growth model, which speaks to access to these district centers. The second one we also looked at was simply how close you are to the project center. And I think you'll recall one of our principles of the project was to have a clear center. So when you come to the point, you know that you're there. It's not a place that has no core or no identity as a place. So again, concept 2 really speaks to that. It has the most land within 5-minute walk of that core area. And then criteria 5 was a very simple metric, just looking at how much retail and entertainment and hotel functions are being provided in each option. And this just speaks to, again, that idea of a balanced land use mix and reducing offsite travel. So according to this criteria, concept 2 has that greatest amount of potential for retail and entertainment provision. So those 5 takeaways contribute to the preliminary recommendations that we've shown here. So number 1, maintain residential and non-residential land use mix. Number 2, implement a land use mix that creates the best proportion of jobs to housing. Implement multiple district-based subcenters to meet daily needs. Concentrate development footprint on the site to maximize links to the center. And include a significant retail, hotel, and entertainment component to reduce offsite trips. So those were the 5 criteria for community. The third tranche of criteria was sustainability. Now this gets pretty technical and maybe isn't as relevant to our discussion today, but just for your information, this really speaks to the potential of solar access in the project. And in this, according to this criteria, concept 2 performed the best, and we think it's because of the really the building configuration on the project, and again, the type of building dispersal that we've illustrated here. Again, I think with this criteria and the next one, which is daylight access, which just means how well buildings are being daylit, which reduces energy demand. Both of these are really dependent on building design and placement in the plan, so it really will become more important in stage 3. But in both of these sustainable criteria, concept 2 perform the best. Another attribute of the sustainability strategy is to look at total vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. And what we determined, as we anticipated, is that concept 1, the complete community, has the lowest amount of VMT. But you can also see that they're all extremely close. They're all about 87.9 million VMT. There's just a very subtle difference. So this speaks to that point that I mentioned earlier, that in some of these criteria, even though we scored them 1, 2, 3, they're actually quite close. And we believe the reason they're so close is because essentially the land use mix for the project overall, when you think about it regionally, generally is approximately the same. So the variation in land use does not differ significantly between concepts 1, 2, or 3. The third sustainability strategy, which we just spoke about, is the opportunity for water conservation, water management without putting water in pipes or undergrounding it. This is both a not only a conservation strategy for water, but also a significant cost element. And in this option, as we anticipated, concept 1 performed the best, and we thought it would because it was specifically designed around this idea. However, concept 2 also does well, and even concept 3 can be designed to perform well under this criteria. And then the final sustainable criteria was the pedestrian and bicycle connectivity. So the methodology of this is simply laying a grid over each of the plan, and then using the road network and the trail network, understanding how easy it is to move from one part of the plan to the other. So a really interesting methodology. And the darker reddish colors show the higher degrees of connectivity, so the most connected portions of the plan. In this option, concept 1, I'm sorry, in this criteria, concept 1 performed the best, and we think that's because it does have this more interwoven open space idea that has trails that complement the sidewalk and road design. So for the, I'm sorry, this should say sustainability. So the preliminary recommendations for sustainability are that to consider building orientation, roof utilization, and building design for solar orientation, but that probably is a stage 3 discussion. Number 3, maintain residential and non-residential land use mix. Number 4, a portion of the open space should be designed to accommodate overland water flow. And then 5, designed for a full and seamless connectivity between trails and sidewalks. The 4th criteria was around open space.
Can I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Sure.
Just going back to that pedestrian and bicycle connectivity discussion.
Yeah.
It looks like this analysis kind of considered what the internal connectivity was. Did you also look at external offsite connectivity for this as well?
Not for this particular criteria. We have looked at that. We did look at that in stage one. We prepared a few exhibits on that, but we did not make that part of this particular analytical set.
And maybe that's a later phase discussion, you know, when planning this, to make sure that along with road connectivity, that includes, you know, bicycle as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll just highlight that too. I agree, Representative, that part of what we're looking at is how this fits into the broader region, and that's roads, but it's also active transportation and looking for ways that we can connect across Bangor and I-15 and provide opportunities for active commuting to and from this site. So, great point.
Yeah, absolutely. The fourth criteria set is organized around open space. And we looked at a variety of attributes of open space. The first one, which you see here, is simply which plan gets people and workers closest to open space. So it just measures distance. And in this option, in this criteria, concept one performed the best. It had the lowest average distance to green space. So this simply speaks to issues of quality of life, but it also speaks to mobility through the project. We are hoping and planning that there can be an open space network or pedestrian or bike network that provide access throughout the whole project. So we can take some of those lessons that we see here in concept one and transfer those to a consensus concept as we move into stage three. The second criteria looked at the programming capacity of the open space. What this tried to look at was how amenable or adaptive are the different open spaces to programming opportunities. So we looked at the regulated sized open spaces, how they were configured, where they were located. And in this option, because we introduced that community park in the Northwest, concept two did perform the best on this particular programming criteria. This criteria looked at trail connectivity. We know this is an important goal for the public, but also I think a characteristic of the Wasatch Front in general, this idea of bike and trail links. In this criteria, concept one performed the best. Again, we feel because it was really designed to optimize for trail connectivity. Criteria four looked at ecological and biodiversity potential. So this is really understanding the open space system to reestablish ecological biodiversity, meaning that these are not groomed or irrigated mowed lawns. These are more naturalized open spaces that bring in that biodiversity component. And then the fifth criteria for open space was slightly different. It talks about proximity. So this isn't just distance to open space, but it's what percentage of the project is within 200 feet of open space. Again, this is a similar criteria, but just measures it slightly differently. Again, concept one performed the best here, and we think that's because it has a series of smaller green links that again provide that connectivity and bike and trail network, but also provides access and proximity to the open space system. So our preliminary recommendations around open space are to have a significant proportion of smaller parks and connective greenways. These contribute significantly to the connectivity of the project and how people can move through it. You then complement that with smaller parks that can be programmed in specific ways. 3 is to add then a third element to the open space plan, which are these linear parks, which can convey stormwater and provide recreational benefits. 4 is to create opportunities for native landscapes to reestablish themselves, and 5 is to create a robust park and greenway network that provides maximum proximity to open space. And the final criteria is the economic evaluation criteria. And in this case, we looked at, again, some economic indicators. This one speaks to parcel frontage on open space. And we know that when a parcel touches open space or fronts on it, that there is a premium derived from that adjacency. You can charge more for rent and purchase. So in this option, in this criteria, concept number 2 performed the best, but again, they were all pretty close in the mid 40s. We also looked at residential quantity and variety. If we're just evaluating based on residential opportunity or potential, of course, option or concept 1 has the highest potential in terms of delivering residential. We think that's important not only in terms of achieving this balanced land use mix, but it also creates opportunities for a different or greater mix of housing types. So it's a strategy that can appeal to greater audiences and populations that may be looking for housing. The 4th criteria looks at simply institutional capacity. So just identifying which option has the highest institutional capacity. And of course, in this instance, it's number 3, the economic catalyst. And we see 2 institutionally based districts. One we call a innovation accelerator, and the other would be a more traditional research campus in the 3rd concept. And then the final economic criteria was simply how much office is accommodated in each plan. And here you can see clearly in concept 3 that the office potential is maximized. So of course, this would have the greatest potential economic contribution to not only the region, but the immediately surrounding area. So those are the criteria that we use to evaluate the concepts. And again, I want to stress that even though we did give each a score, many of the criteria were very close together in terms of how the concepts performed. And so we think many of these benefits that we've talked about and recommendations are easily transferable from one concept to another. So in terms of the economic recommendations, create an open space strategy that touches the greatest amount of parcel, commit to a variety of housing types and parcel sizes to create choice in the market, create a significant institutional and research presence within the project, and then 4, include substantial office development to maximize economic development. Again, preliminary for discussion. And then I'll conclude this part of the discussion with the scores. So we did enter the scores into this summary, and you can see the green indicates which score performed the highest within that category. The red indicates the lowest. And at the bottom, you can see the total score. So according to this ranking system or scoring system, option 2 or alternate 2 did perform the highest in many of our criteria. Concept 1 performed the second best, and concept 3 performed the third best. Now, again, I do want to emphasize that that many of these scores were very close together, and the concepts are transferable between concepts. So Ellen, I think with that, I'll stop and open it up for discussion and questions.
Thank you, Pete. I think that's helpful and really valuable exercise. Let me make just a few points before we have some discussion. First of all, this working group is different from the others. The others are composed of people that have specific expertise in various topics, and so we can drill down more into some of their areas, like the innovation district or the economic development or sustainability. This group is composed of elected officials that have a bigger picture view, and so we're kind of presenting things, I think, at a little higher level here and in what we'll do in the second part of our agenda today. But I do want to emphasize a few things that Pete said. One, we're not voting on a particular alternative here. We're looking for your input on the lessons learned, whether there are additional lessons that we ought to consider, and what kinds of concepts in those various alternatives ought to be carried forward into a preferred alternative. I will say that we certainly understand that this is not a perfect scoring system for a couple of reasons. One, by forcing the scoring 1 to 3, you exaggerate the differences. You probably saw that in many of those criteria, there was a very small difference among the various options that we outlined. And yet, by forcing the score 1 to 3, you have a 30% difference between them. So that's one impact. The other is that there is no weighting involved in this. We know that in the minds of our board members, and I would assume you and others in the community, some of these criteria are more important than others. And yet we don't try to do a weighting in this exercise. So often there are kind of internally competitive criteria. And so at the end of the day, we're going to have to evaluate based on what are the highest priorities. But look at it as an exercise that gives you an additional tool as we conduct this conversation. So with that, let me see first, any additional questions or comments? And after that, we'll kind of start digging into a little more detail here. Anything in general you want to share? Tracy, you've got your hand raised.
I have a question on the evaluation. How is access to schools and education evaluated in these criteria?
Pete, do you want to take that? It wasn't one of the specific criteria, but in each of the planning, when you see the institutional piece, we've included as part of that institutional or civic piece, a school. And so I know as part of our general planning, we've been looking at how you would get people to school and how far it would be. But Pete, anything more specific on that?
Yeah, as Ellen said, it wasn't a particular point of analysis. It's something we're really interested in. And I think as the school strategy becomes clearer, it's something we can definitely look at, perhaps in more detail in option 3. As Alan mentioned, we lumped it in generally with the institutional analytics. However, let me just flip to that page. But I think more interestingly, and I'm not sure if you're talking about access to the school offsite or within the project, but I think it's closely connected to the connectivity discussion. And what we hope and imagine is, children who may attend this potential school can travel to school on a trail rather than a road, who can, ride their bikes or walk with minimal conflict with automobiles. So, we didn't analyze for that exact criteria, but it's a great question, and maybe it's something we can take on in the next stage after we clarify exactly what the school is and where it is.
Yeah, I think so too, because, and you're right, it depends on what type of school is. If it's just like a K through 6 or a K through 8, there would still be transportation out to surrounding high schools also. It
Right.
just, it's an important part of the infrastructure of a community, and the way traffic flows, it has a huge impact on traffic flows and patterns also, and just the ability to get kids safely to and from schools.
Yeah.
Is important.
Absolutely.
And I think that speaks to the question raised earlier about offsite. How do you get in and out of the site? Not just how do you move around once you're in it? Because I imagine some children may come in, from other neighborhoods nearby.
Oh, that's an important point, and one that we've been talking about and kind of designated that once we get into the details of stage 3 and optimizing a particular preferred alternative, then we got to get in the details of what goes where rather than just general patterns. So it's an important reminder. And Amanda, you've got a question or comment.
Yeah, I'd like to just resonate in the same comments that Tracy made. When I consider what constitutes quality of life as a parent, and keep in mind, Peter, I don't know how many people have shared with you, Utah is a really unusual state in that we have the highest fertility rate in the country. Our young population is huge. It's one of our great strengths as a community, and I think that that's a big part of why some of the input that started in the initial stages before you came on as a design firm talked a lot about education innovation. We really want the space to be able to catapult us to the next stage of being able to have great transition from the K-12 system into the university system, and having that innovation piece is a big part of this. And just for me personally, when I consider what constitutes quality of life, access to schools and high quality schools trump anything above shopping areas and a number of other things that are being considered here. So I think it would be a remarkably incomplete picture if we don't have schools and transportation to schools and some of those other considerations a big part of the criteria.
Important point, and we agree. And as I said, the exercise at this stage is kind of looking at big picture, at mixes and how things get around and relationships. And when we start getting into that preferred alternative, then we have to start looking at specific uses and where they go and how they can fit with the other pieces. And we absolutely agree that schools is going to be a critical piece of those neighborhoods, not just within the boundaries, but offsite as well. So important points. Thank you.
Alan, I appreciate, a lot of these concepts. There were things that I really liked in all 3 of them. And so, and to some respect, I'd love to see all of it, all of those things be able to be incorporated, but I know that there's trade-offs. In the first concept, that the complete community, I really like the amount of housing that it had. That, to me, that seems really appealing. We have a housing shortage in the state, and especially along the Wasatch Front, it's really hard to find a good housing supply. In the second concept, I was initially very skeptical about that one. I wondered, do we need a large regional park in this space? That's something that I kind of go back and forth on that as well. I see that one of the things that did was provided a little bit more of that maybe programmable type open space, but and at the same time concentrated the rest of the density in other areas, which really provided some additional advantages in terms of increased transit use and some other advantages that maybe provided. I also wonder on concept 2 if, I kind of try to understand what having large retail and entertainment options would be like. Because then again, you're bringing people in from offsite onto the site, hopefully to attract those. Every community, I think, because of the way that the tax incentives are structured, every community wants to have lots of retail and lots of entertainment options in their community, because that's what generates a lot of tax base. And so I kind of feel like lots of communities compete for that. And maybe this is an opportunity to have an area that is more a different mix of retail and entertainment that you might not find in every other type of community. I don't know. For example, well, I mean, you can find large theaters and those things. You've got Hale Center Theater that's in Sandy, and you've got the soccer stadium that's in Sandy as well. So you don't have to always go downtown to find those types of entertainment options. And in this area, I don't know if it would just be movie theaters and maybe other types of performing arts that would be in that type of entertainment region. But I understand that having that available, maybe I don't know if we're looking to attract offsite visitation to the site for those types of things, or just provide enough that people, the residents on the site, would have some options that they wouldn't need to go offsite. And so I guess it's just, what's the goal there? Are we really trying to make it a regional entertainment hub, or are we just trying to provide something to service the people that are there locally? I also like the in the third concept, I know that one of the big focuses from the state, one of the big goals is to be an economic driver and to provide more opportunities for jobs. So that has some appeal as well. One thing that I wonder too, and I don't know that we have an answer to this or really have a crystal ball, but I'm thinking a lot about after we emerge from the pandemic, what impact that has to our work structure and our relationship to going back to the office. I know that we're going to, I think that we can expect that there will be more opportunities for flexible work schedules and working from home. And that type of work home and relationship might, I wonder how that might influence the planning on this as well. Whereas maybe we may have been used to, I live in a bedroom community and then I commute to a work center to go to the office every day. And that has those implications on office space and on residential space and transportation options, versus an area that maybe thinks a little bit more about fostering that flexible work and home type environment. I don't know how you would necessarily plan for that so much, but maybe in that sense, an option, like an option 1 or an option 2 might be acceptable versus an option 3 that really tries to maximize office space. Maybe then it pushes us a little bit more toward that mixed use and the type of thing that we see in option 2 or even option 1 in terms of that relationship with balancing open space, entertainment, retail, and on all those different types of uses. So I don't have an answer, and so I wonder. I do like the approach that you're taking, where you're saying, okay, here's a couple of different options, but I think you could take positive aspects or lessons learned from each of those concepts and incorporate them a little bit more. You know, like maybe, you know, you could take a concept too, but maybe maybe the residential might end up being a little bit more dense or something like that, that combines a little bit of those concepts of all three, and, you know, kind of coalesces into a consensus, like you said. So those are just random thoughts. I don't have any questions necessarily, but
No, and I'm gonna, you know, see if Pete and Steve and Aaron and others want to comment, but thank you. I mean, that's exactly the kind of input we're looking for. And as you've identified, there are trade-offs in all of these things, and we have to work through the trade-offs. There are also really good opportunities in each of these concepts that can be carried forward. And so it's really helpful for us to hear from all of you. What are the elements, what are the must-haves in each of these concepts that ought to be carried forward? What just doesn't work that we ought to abandon at this stage and not try to carry forward? And just on your last point about what the pandemic means to our physical environment, that's a discussion that's going on in every development community around the world. And we're participating in those too, and trying to figure out just that question. But yeah, Pete, Aaron, Steve, thoughts?
Well, I'll just make a few comments. You know, your Jeff, your whole discussion of the entertainment hub, that's exactly what we were trying to get in here, was something to generate that discussion, because it wasn't clear to us, you know, what role this should play, you know, in terms of being a more of a regional, you know, center for entertainment. And there's detail in these programs that aren't clear in this presentation. For instance, that particular regional retail hub was meant to do exactly as you're saying. It wasn't meant to be the same, more of the same. It was meant to ask the question, what's kind of missing, you know, around the area, you know, within a 10 or 15 minute driving time, that the cities don't have, you know, maybe more live entertainment. There's a cultural venue of significant scale suggested in this, a 3,500 foot performance, you know, venue, which we could talk probably an hour, you know, about whether this is the right place for something like that. More a place, you know, the population, the target population here is sort of young to medium, sort of aged workforce, STEM focused, you know, highly educated, moderate to higher income. And it's like, well, what, you know, these days, I've done a lot of work in Silicon Valley where companies are trying to draw that type of workforce in, and it's like these are the types of places that they're thinking about that are highly attractive to that workforce that maybe can't be found in other parts of the state or in other cities. So that particular element is meant to be highly targeted to be unique and to create a very kind of, you know, high energy, active, you know, social, people watching, you know, kind of entertainment retail, you know, environment. And so we're kind of looking, as we go through these meetings, sort of a thumbs up or thumbs down, you know, on that component. And it could be in any of the three schemes, you know, and the program elements, as noted several times, can move around between the schemes. The other thing I would point out is, you know, there's three very different urban design plans here. And you know, even though there's, you know, we can take components of any of the schemes and combine them into one, we also need to be looking at the urban design form and start to develop an opinion of which urban design form, you know, is the most synergistic, you know, the most exciting, most engaging, you know, creates the most you know, connectivity, and will draw, you know, the highest quality of businesses. And also, you know, we have a whole task in front of us of finding master developers to build this thing. So, you know, there's a little bit of a question here of which of these are going and which components are going to be also attractive to get the most interest, you know, from the master development community.
Yeah, those are all important considerations. It's difficult, and we don't want to create a space that tries to, boil the ocean and doesn't actually accomplish the goal because it's not focused enough. But if we focus on one thing and it misses the mark, then, or doesn't, it doesn't resonate in the market for the developers, any of those things, that could be a challenge. So,
I mean, one of the things that we really was tempting to do, but we didn't, was to do some value weighting, on these different components.
mm-hmm.
Because, if everything is equal, like I made the point, for instance, on the matrix, solar access has the same value as job generation. Well, is that really, the case? So it would be, it'd be an interesting thought exercise, to at some point, create some value weighting on some of this scoring to see, how that shifts, the outcomes.
We can anticipate
I agree.
exactly what the board's going to be doing. It's their role going forward to kind of decide what are the priorities among various competing options. And but in doing that, it's really helpful for them to hear from you and our other working groups. And that's part of what we're trying to do through these exercises, is get a sense for the relative priorities of different uses. As you, Representative, and Steve said, is it worth spending some time looking at a regional entertainment hub, or should our focus be elsewhere? So any ideas along those lines are helpful.
And my thoughts would be, I think it is important to kind of think of these in terms of weighting or priority, because, I would say what we're really trying to accomplish is, provide an economic center and housing. Having the housing and the residential component is there, I think, to support the economic aspect of it, and which, of course, reduces transportation trips and helps with air quality. But and then in addition to that, I think if we focus on those goals, then we can say, okay, how can we accomplish that goal? But then I guess it makes it secondary to say, then we want to make sure that we do it accomplish that goal in the most sustainable way we can, providing enough open space to support the residential component, so that people who want to work there also want to live there. In order to, they want to be able to somebody who wants to live within walking distance of their office or of other job opportunities, also wants to have open space or be places where they can go to shop and play. So that those aspects play a supporting role. Another thought is, jobs today, people don't stay at the same job all the time. And so someone might live on this site and they might have the opportunity to also get a job on the site. But then there's a very good chance that even if they had that they may not stay at that job very long. And so now they don't want to have to move just because they get a different job at a company that's downtown or down in Utah County. And so we want to create that opportunity to live and work in close proximity, but we can't rely on that because that's very fluid. I think if people want to live there, it's because they want to live there because of the atmosphere that it provides in their living situation. And if it just so happens that they find a job that's in that same area, that's great. Or, if there's a lot of rental units versus ownership, then maybe that's a little bit more fluid because people are moving more frequently if they're renting versus owning. So I don't know, it's complex for sure.
It is. You've done a really good job of identifying a number of these trade-offs and challenges and the kinds of things we're thinking about. And you're absolutely right. Can't expect that everybody who lives here is going to work here and vice versa. But we can provide opportunities that make it easier to do that and maybe create some regional benefits in the process. But excellent points.
Yeah, Alan, I think Jeff raises a lot of really appropriate questions, and those are exactly what we were hoping to stimulate here today. And Aaron, maybe you have some thoughts on what developers are doing these days around office development. But what we're hearing is that they feel it's unlikely there'll be a full return to 5 days a week in the office for a number of people. So it'll be some sort of hybrid work from home, work from the office mix. And of course, that's dependent on each employee's personal situation and what their preferences are. But most developers now are thinking and moving towards a hybrid office environment. So that part of that is not building extremely large floor plates, where everyone is packed together on a floor. They're providing a lot more amenities within the building. They're providing ways to subdivide floors and group different employees together, around shared work objectives. So it's a really interesting time to be in the office business right now. But so that's one thing. And then the other is, you touched on, I think, a really important question is the essential balancing act between building an employment district, but then also building the elements that support what employees are asking for today. And the irony of it is that to really build a vibrant employment district, you almost have to build all the other things along with it that create the type of environment that attracts these tech workers and innovation workers, because they are really amenities and access to open space and all these other things we've been talking about really are key decision makers in where they choose to live and work. So it's just sort of an interesting balance between building office space, but then also building all the other stuff that these industries and employers are looking for.
I think one of the interesting outcomes we've seen from the post-pandemic thinking is the idea that all of us now are in the office space business from our own locations. And so we've already got the challenge of, as was pointed out earlier, of a kind of larger family units to be accommodated amongst the residential product that's provided on site, and how traditionally that has meant more single family housing. And we are looking for a different model here. One, for economic reasons, and two, just for reasons of urban density. And then that's further exacerbated by the need for every individual residential unit to have some sort of office space that's applied to it now. So the need for extra bedrooms is even more interesting. The one thing that is a kind of push-pull against that is, perhaps with fewer people commuting to work, there will be less need for such significant levels of car ownership. So there, maybe you're robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit by reducing the size of garage needs, and that becomes that's where some of that delta in the housing sizes comes from.
Interesting. Other general comments, things from any of those concepts you'd like to see carried forward in particular, or set aside for now?
Just a couple
Tracy,
more
you've got your
things.
hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple more things came to mind as Jeff was speaking. I thought kind of the same thing, pandemic related. Are we going to need retail? Is retail going to survive the future? Same with movie theaters. Those are all good questions. But one thing I just wanted to add is option 2. The thing that drew me most to the second one was the big sports park area. Programmable field space
is in high demand in our areas. As Amanda said, we have a lot of children, and I would add to that, our children all play soccer, or lacrosse or other stuff like that. So, and maybe that can be incorporated into the other options too, but when we're talking green space and open space, just think programmable as an important feature, along with is just the fact that we like to have our green and open space, and that's in high demand.
Thank you.
And then I'll just add, personally, as a cyclist, we would like to be able to ride our bikes to work, and we're afraid about being killed. So I'm happy to see that, you know, incorporating opportunities for bikes to move through safely is a feature that I personally like.
I think there's several of us on this call that feel the same way. Like to get on a bike and like to believe we can get back safely. So that's an important point. Thank you. We've got just about a half an hour left, and we had kind of a second exercise. As I said, we don't need to go into as much detail with this group as others, but Pete, if you could bring up the key vision elements and talk about the connectivity piece a little bit, and see if there are ideas from this group, which has a broader perspective than some of our other groups. I think we can talk through that a bit.
Yeah, Alan, let me do that. So, oops, give me 1 minute here. Hold on. So, another part of our stage 2 work was to look in more detail at the key vision elements. These, of course, were generated through different working groups and different public comment. And what we did was we extracted key principles around each of the key vision elements. And on the right, you can see what we're calling initiatives. So the initiatives really are specific actions or features of the plan that we feel as a group need to be included. So the ones in yellow were generated from different stakeholders at our March 4th workshop, so about 2 weeks ago. The white ones are initiatives that are being considered mostly by the design team right now. So I think if there are specific things you want to see here, and no detail is too small to put on the table at this point, or no aspiration is too large to put on the table as well. So what we're trying to do is really get specific, so that in stage 3 we can point to these different initiatives in the plan and say this has been included, or we were not able to include something because it was a trade-off with something else. So it's really becoming a checklist for specific strategies, initiatives, elements of the plan that you would like to see. So around community, we have these 6 principles. We have about 20 or so different initiatives that we're looking at. Around transportation, we pulled out again 6 principles. So some of the specifics that have been requested or suggested are the idea of including autonomous vehicles, including transit-oriented development along the BRT route. Transit-oriented development simply means clustering or grouping buildings around transit. Potentially connecting to commuter rail and possibly a front runner station down the road. Anyway, you can see what these are around transportation. Around economic growth, I think what we've heard today and what has come up several times is reconfirming our commitment to jobs and economic development on the project, and that most decisions should be made through that lens. There was also some discussion about smaller companies, recruitment and education, the ecosystem of innovation and how that can raise or enhance wages. So again, you can see some of those specific ideas. One interesting concept that's emerged is adding a bioscience or biotech element to this innovation district vision. So it's not simply about tech, but also might have a health and wellness tie-in, a biosciences tie-in, that could be part of this institutional alignment that we've talked about. Around innovation, really ideas about bringing innovation in Utah forward, that this is the place where maybe there can be a aggregation of innovative companies that are bringing new products to market, that we're including students in that process, giving them internships, letting emerging technologies be daylighted here. So that's all really exciting. Maybe tax credits and other benefits or rewards for locating companies here. Sustainability, we really, I think, agree as a group amongst the stakeholders and the design team that this needs to be a model for Utah, potentially even a national level model in terms of breaking new ground around water, walkability, mobility, things like that. So some interesting ideas about sustainability. And then the final one is really about collaboration. And I think this one is really appropriate for Utah because there is such a spirit of collaboration in Utah. Is how do we then translate that spirit into physical design characteristics of the project that facilitate this idea of collaboration, bringing people together in multiple settings, facilitating not only technological collaboration, but community collaboration around education and retail and entertainment ideas. So a lot of really great ideas are starting to emerge, specific ideas that in stage 3 we will be incorporating into the design. So happy to open it up for any other ideas around what these initiatives should be. And the idea really is to get this what we call a virtuous cycle between the sustainability vision, the smart city initiatives, and the key vision elements, so that the project really is has synthesized not only sustainability but other operational ideas as well as programmatic ideas. So I'm happy to take any comments or questions on any of these KVEs or the initiatives that we've begun to identify.
While you're thinking about that, we heard loud and clear earlier that we need to make sure that we're addressing schools and the connectivity with the surrounding neighborhoods for being able to get students and parents in and out. So that's a piece that probably fits in potentially several of these, but the collaboration one is one of those potential sites. And I think for this particular working group, that last one on collaboration, because you are elected officials and taking kind of a higher level view, you may have a really good perspective to provide some input on these concepts. But we're certainly open to your input on any of them. Again, kind of specific ideas that ought to be carried forward and incorporated into our detailed planning and subsequent steps. Just don't want to miss something that's really important to to get this thing right.
And I think also, Ellen, any aspirational asks or elements that maybe you've been thinking about and haven't been able to implement in your leadership in your community, that that would work here. How can we push the envelope on these different concepts?
I like a lot of what is listed here. Yeah, there's some good things, because I think you've identified some really important things. We keep bringing up connectivity, but I think that is a particular challenge on this site, because you've got I-15 that's a barrier, and you've got Bangor Highway that's a barrier. You've got the front runner line, and those are all those present challenges to connectivity for both active transportation and just all transportation as well, because it constricts and bottlenecks those connection options, right? There's only it rather than dispersing and having lots of different opportunities to move in and out of the site.
Yeah.
It really limits to just a couple of crossing points, and so that's a big part of it. And so whether and that affects, I think, both automobiles, transit, as well as the active transportation connection. But being able to connect, for example, being able to connect the open space to the Jordan River Parkway, and then across I-15 to the Corner Canyon area, that really changes the dynamic. For example, for access to open space, if you can get across Bangor and access the Jordan River Parkway Trail, that's a huge linear park opportunity to that you can connect to. And so yeah,
really good point. That's an important piece. Amanda, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking and looking at the option number 3, I love the idea of having a central park area like that, in part because when you consider what we have downtown, and we have what's close to Temple Square, but we don't really have any real gathering space as a city that allows for that. And to have a space like that with innovation close by, I think would be phenomenal in such a centrally important location that services both Utah County and Salt Lake County like that. I just think the potential of what could happen there would be really remarkable. And to me, that's more important in many ways than having more of the linear green spaces in other places. I think just to have it in that kind of a space really does attract arts and other kinds of innovations to kind of gather.
Yeah, that's insightful. That helps. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Amanda. And I think that's our challenge in stage 3, is to somehow balance this idea of a central park, which actually was one of our founding principles, this idea of a center, that when you come to the point, there's something there that says, I'm here. Balancing that with this more linear idea that has certain ecological and water management benefits and connectivity benefits. But I think it's doable, actually. Just give us a few weeks.
As one of the pieces that I really liked was that in a lot of these concepts, you can get from one district to another without getting on a road, and that's especially appealing if you've got young kids. But I'm with you, Amanda. I think having a place where the public can gather for entertainment or restaurants or just to see other people um, is really kind of powerful, and a place where you don't have to look both ways to cross the street because you don't have a lot of cars running by, but it's a place where people can feel some peace and easy access.
I will say one of the cities that I've been thinking of the whole time that we've been having this conversation is Boise. I was just up there a couple weekends ago, and I'd forgotten how beautiful their green space, the river is in the middle of the city. It's incredible that you can feel like you are in the middle of a canyon, but you're in the middle of a large city.
Yeah.
And they also have some of those other pedestrian shopping areas, and it's a beautiful balance, and it's proof of the fact that it's possible. But yeah, having those larger open green spaces like that to have like an actual spot, I just think it's going to attract events that our city hasn't really been able to have before, just because of the lack of a Central Park option. I mean, the Central Park idea, it's the whole reason New York City is what it is. So.
Yeah, great thoughts. Great thoughts. What else comes to mind? What are we missing? What's a big idea for a wow factor that we haven't talked about? Something that would, we've had some good ideas on this, but what else distinguishes this site?
Alan, one thing that might be of value would be to go and walk through the 3 urban design plans and talk about the characteristics of each and maybe get some input on those.
Absolutely. We've outlined those and shared them. We can pull up, if Pete, if you're able to pull up that,
Yeah,
slide
let me,
that has all of them on there, and then Steve, maybe you can walk us through it.
Yeah, I can do that with my, I think we would each talk about them differently, but yeah, I think it'd be, because that's one of the, like I said earlier, one of the major issues. Can we get those in? I guess this is good. Complete community is I think they're all really good plans. All 3 alternatives each are good urban design concepts, and I'm really torn myself. Again, I think in my mind, we need to talk about these somewhat independent components that we talked about earlier could be moved into each of these, things like block size, access to open space, the amount of
Steve, you're kind of breaking up on us.
are all things that are fairly transferable. Yeah, I'm going to turn off my video.
Okay. I've
got bad internet where I am right now. Hopefully that'll help. Can you hear me okay?
We can now, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the complete community was the original competition submission from Peter and his team, and the strength is that it creates very clear districts. Very clear districts. The lower ones in our bottom right tend to be more jobs and employment oriented along the interstate. The central one is kind of the downtown. The other 3 tend to be a little bit more, residential, in focus. And you have this linear park system that separates them, that creates a very highly connected trail system and provides a lot of open space access, to the to the various districts. And each one has its own little core and center. The middle one, the regional hub, is one that, one of the key trends internationally and nationally in city planning is to reintegrate what we call green infrastructure. In other words, the open space network that exists at a regional level back into kind of the urban fabric. That was lost. The last 50 years, the open space was all pushed out to the edges, and the centers of the cities were all, concrete and steel. And so this really represents that trend in a very strong manner, where the Jordan River open space to the north jumps across, the highway into a significant, open space, programmable and natural open space. But then it extends back into, through the project in kind of what appears to be kind of a organic sort of riverine, kind of form. So it's really about open space connectivity. And then the urban core on this one is organized around, one of these riverine kind of open space legs to create a very interesting and unique kind of open space and urban core. The third one was based on one of the other competitors, which we thought was a fairly compelling diagram. And what it does is it again creates a series of, five or six separate districts, each with a central open space. But then there's a fairly strong open space linkage into kind of, call it the downtown. And the downtown is that organized around a central park. And the concept is the central park could be a very European kind of central park. It could have some water and wetlands. It could have a significantly sized outdoor people gathering place for concerts. And so it really creates that kind of central park idea around which there's a significant increase of density and probably the most, a vertical, if you will, higher density urban core of all three, although that's something that could be variable amongst all of them. So this one is interesting because it's got probably the strongest diagram of synergy, in my opinion, between these outlying districts into a central, a central core, area. So anyway, that would be my description of all three. Each one is different. Each one has what we want them to be fundamentally different from an urban design standpoint, and they are. So I think it'd be interesting for you if you have any comments or opinions on these diagrams, love to hear them.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that? Is there a framework that you like best that we can use as kind of the baseline and then bring the preferred elements into that?
And if you don't, that's fine too. There's plenty of opportunity to move towards one or the other as we go through this analysis.
Yeah.
Well, like for example, I think, for example, taking the economic catalyst model and maybe adding a little bit more on the you could add a little bit more residential mix and some, entertainment mix to that. And I think that could be a really good model. Every one of these has all of those different elements. They're just in different proportions. And so,
and on this topic,
right.
Disappear the programming, disappear which one has the most jobs or housing, and think of it more as like just the urban design, connectivity, just the organizational, aspect itself. Because like I said, like you said, we can make complete community an economic catalyst, right? I mean, just by beefing up the, the jobs and the innovation, so it's really more about urban form.
Yeah, so I guess in that sense, I think I like the economic catalyst one as a starting point. And this kind of goes back a little bit to what Amanda was saying. She, having that centralized hub surrounding that park, but concentrating that density in that core, I think has got some good potential.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that thought.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have a preference? It's kind of the foundation or the framework around which we build the program and the details. Okay. Well, this won't be the last opportunity to weigh in on where we're going. We're pretty much out of time. I don't want to cut off any discussion if there are additional ideas. So let me just give you a last chance to weigh in on anything we've presented today, and then I'll kind of wrap up with next steps and what we can expect over the next several weeks.
I'll just add that economic catalyst, where we're right on I-15 and right on Bangor, just transportation wise, that makes sense to have that location. Yeah, it's just a good location for economic catalyst type of model, but there's definitely elements, that I gravitate to, particularly in the regional hub model.
Yeah. What are some of those elements, Tracy, that you'd like to see transferred over? You mentioned the larger regional park with programming before.
Yeah, I really like the park area right around the Jordan River. Just that place to get away and have more nature feel is the biggest draw on the regional hub part.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. You've contributed a lot of time over the months, and today is no exception. And your input has been just outstanding. It's given us things that we can work with and carry forward with the board. So we're going to be meeting with the other working groups this week. We'll get through all 5 and conduct similar exercises and get some detail that we'll then incorporate into some recommendations that we're going to present to the board. And the board next week and the following week are going to have some working sessions where they get this information and can start talking through it, with the goal that at our next formal, regularly scheduled board meeting on April 13th, they'll be ready to select kind of the preferred alternative, essentially give us direction on what mix of these ideas and others we're going to carry forward. And we'll start to develop that as stage 3. And then stage 4, as I said, is we're going to try to optimize the concept. So we'll have an outline, but we're going to start thinking about the details. How do things connect? What are uses that we're missing? How can we make sure that we're providing municipal services to this area? Are there new access points that would allow this to function much better, and those kinds of things? So we'll be bringing you back to evaluate future plans as we move ahead. And so you'll continue to have many opportunities to visit with us. And in the interim, we always welcome your calls, your emails, and your thoughts. We don't have a monopoly on the good ideas, and we're trying to build this from input from the public and from those of you who have expertise and perspective that is really important to make this the kind of community amenity we want. So we're excited as we move forward. We've certainly got a ways to go, but I think our professionals have put us on a really good path. So unless there's anything else, I'll just again say thank you, and we look forward to further discussions.
Thank you very much. This has been excellent. Appreciate all the work that's gone into this.
Thanks, Representative.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thanks for everyone's comments. Really appreciate it.